Now, normally, in normal times, what I would be saying right now is welcoming the crowd of people that are here to see the exhibition and for the gallery talk. It's very informal. We just do a walkthrough of the exhibition. The juror, Tom Stoy, may say some things. Anybody who's here is welcome to make comments, ask questions. So it becomes like a conversation, which I think is really great. Tom Stoy was the juror for this show, and he was the sole person who chose the work, considering how the work came together for Oakland Piece of Exhibition. And Tom, could you say a little something about your own practice or how you dealt with choosing the work for the show?
Well, my background is in street photography, so for me, this show was kind of a challenge. With the pandemic, there wasn't as many entries as there normally would be, and a lot of the imagery didn't really pertain to my genre of photography. But in the end, I kind of enjoyed that because it was a challenge for me to just, see things in a different way. And personally, I react more in a visceral way to photographs. It's difficult for me sometimes to put into words how I feel about a photograph. But when I do look at photography, I respond to it in an emotional way. And I think that played a big role in how I chose a lot of these photographs. I might not really know as much about landscape photography as a landscape photographer would, but I can still get a sense or a feeling about a photograph from looking at it that is more guttural as opposed to trying to explain it in words sometimes.
Now, when you were choosing the work for the show, were you responding to the individual merit of the pieces, or were you doing that and also thinking about how it made up a cohesive exhibition?
Well, it's funny you say that because in the beginning I was strictly looking at them like in groups, which ones went with other photographs, and that's reflected in the way the show is set up. There's certain groupings that are very cohesive as a group, and that group might be anywhere from 2 to 3 photographs or more. But I think photographs take on a different meaning when they're placed with other photographs that might not necessarily have the same subject matter, but they have an overall feel to them. So that was definitely something at the center of my selection process when I was looking at everything.
Okay, well, we'll just do a walkthrough of the exhibition, so we could start here with this piece.
I was actually going to start over here, if you don't mind.
That's fine.
Is that plan on? So, first of all, thank you to the Scarab Club for having me juror the show. And like I mentioned earlier, I am a street photographer, so I was really happy to see photographs pertaining to the Black Lives Matter movement because it's so current, and I think it's important as a photographer to speak to the times that you live in. And I was actually worried there wouldn't be any photographs of the Black Lives Matter movement. And the ones that were submitted, I just think are beautiful. This particular group, and these are all the same photographer, Adam Dewey. And one of the things that I like about these photographs is a lot of the national photographs you see, like the New York Times and the Main Street Press, they deal with like civic centers and downtowns and major arteries of busy cities. And these reference more the neighborhoods in which the protests are taking place at a smaller level. And I love that part of it. This particular one, which is titled People Divided, this got second place. And what I love about this photograph is just this like dividing line. There's no fence, there's nothing like separating them, but yet there's this social tension between the two groups. And the policeman pointing towards, I don't know who exactly, probably this guy, but I just love the tension between the two. And then there's this, whether it was purposeful or not, there's this almost dividing line between the two groups. And when I look at these photographs, like this one too, I think it's emboldened people to act in a way that they wouldn't normally act towards law enforcement. And it's kind of a chance to express yourself. I also think there's a bit of, in this particular photograph, you can tell, even though you can't see his face, He's just brave and moved by speaking his voice, and I just love these photographs. And the boy in the foreground, he just screams neighborhood and place. So I was just so happy to see all these in one setting and to reflect Detroit, not just the national scene. And then this photograph over here, and you have to forgive me, a lot of these names I can't, I'm not sure how they're pronounced or not. Basil Zavisky, it doesn't really relate to this subject matter, but this was Trina's idea actually to place it with the Black Lives Matter photographs. And it again speaks to the power of taking photographs, you know, as an individual photograph or with a grouping. And I think this is more of a metaphor for, you know, how fractured we are as a nation and the pain and the division within our society right now. So I love this photograph, the way it ties into this grouping over here. Okay, so getting back to the grouping of photographs, these three photographs, when I was selecting them on my computer, I saw them as a group. The two bookends are by Laurie Tennant, and then the middle one is by Ralph Jones. And Laurie's photographs are these iconic photographs of flowers flowers are such a kind of commonplace and traditional subject matter, but Laurie has a way of making them iconic, and because of Laurie's background in botany, she understands flowers, and there's just this feeling, there's almost this human feeling about her photographs. And the other thing I like about Laurie, as far as process, her photographs fade into black, and not just the black background, but even the subject. They just really pop off the page. And I just love this work, the whole body work too. And a lot of her work is hung outside, which really amplifies you know, the powerful nature of the photographs when they're put in the actual setting where they came from. And then Ralph's photograph here of Lake Erie. What I like about this photograph is you see this pile of ice shards or ice plates, and this photograph is like a secret to me. You don't really know how they got there, how they became this way, but there's this sculptural heap of ice that just, you know, is so beautiful, and it's a mystery as to how it was formed. And there's a solitude to this photograph that I really love. And another one by Laurie Tennant. This one is a dragon by Lake. And again, they just beautifully frame Ralph's photograph, but they stand out on their own. I think Laurie could speak better to, you know, her own approach to it and how she feels about it. So I want Laurie to say a couple words about it real quickly.
Thank you.
And Ralph as well.
And thanks for having me on the show. And I liked that you said, you know, how they were iconic. And what I'm really trying to do is get like intimate portraits. I have this relationship with the specimens that I get, and it could be on the side of the road, or it could be this one a friend brought me and said, I don't even know what this is in my garden. So it's this kind of dancing with plants that I do, where, you know, it may work, it may not work. This came from Belle Isle and their conservatory, and you know, bat flower, like it's just the coolest thing. I'd never seen one before. So it's this ongoing like exploration of things I've never seen or things that are familiar, and finding more architectural details in them. And I just love Ralph's photograph too. It's so sculptural.
Thank you so much.
Just the layers of that.
Yeah, it's amazing.
You wonder if you placed it there, you know, if it was, you scared with the big sheets of light. But I love it, and the lighting and everything is really subtle. So.
How the three of them seem to belong together. As soon as I saw all three, I'm like, man, you know, they belong together.
So Rob, I have a question for you. You do a lot of street photography. Do you have a different mindset when you're doing landscape photography, or do you switch gears, or
Well, this is part of an ongoing series, and I've been doing it for 4 or 5 years, and probably 3 of those years I didn't even realize it was a series. And it's documenting the Detroit River and all the places along the river that most people don't get to see. And this was shot in either January or February.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I tried to do this winter, we go 10, 20 days at a time without seeing the sun, just dreary, dreadful weather. And so one of the things that I tried to do this winter is embrace and celebrate the dreariness of Michigan. And that's a long exposure. It might be maybe a minute long. And when you have clouds that are moving and water that's moving, with the long exposure, it creates a blur. And it's, that blurry effect against that solid chunk of ice. I saw it and it just gripped me.
Yeah.
The funny thing about that was Sterling State Park, and it was dreary, but temperature-wise, it was a nice day. And there were people walking on the beach, jogging on the beach, and nobody looked at that twice.
Yes. That's your responsibility, though, I think, as a photographer, is to invite people into your world so they do look at something, maybe after the fact, but well done. Okay, so the next 3 photographs, again, I kind of saw them as a grouping. This first one by Gordon Rodwin, called Window Iron. What I like about this photograph is there's a lot going on in it, yet it still has this very peaceful quality about it. And you have this strong foreground with the broken window, and then the middle ground with the wrought iron. And then it's not till you go to the background that you realize, you're not in Paris in the 50s. You can see parts of the city and a chain link fence. So this just reminds me a lot of the photography I studied back in art school. It has an antiquated look to it. And same with this one by Jamie McCusack,
Yeah.
sorry, called End of Day Shadows. This reminds me of the Cortege print. Andre Cortege photographed people from his studio window looking down on the streets of Paris. And what I noticed literally minutes before I got here today is this photograph is purposely hung upside down. And there is a disorienting quality to it where the people almost look like they're going to fall over. And sometimes that happens with a photograph. You read it, it's like a song or a movie where you might not like it the first time. And then the more you look at it, you find new things in it. And I was almost embarrassed that I didn't notice it was upside down. It doesn't take away from the photograph at all. It adds to it. I just love this photograph. And this one here, this also reminds me of like a European photograph, maybe a Bresson print or something from that time period. But what I like about this is the subtlety of the tones. It's not, everything's kind of dark and muted. And you have this really simple architectural background, and then the foreground, even though it's all in darkness, it's very busy, and it kind of clashes with this clean background. So beautiful photograph. And that one's by Kaylee Johnson.
I love the body language and the way her hand.
Yeah, the way her hand is.
It has a timeless feel.
For sure.
Timeless.
It does.
Yeah. You could see it in our history of photography book.
And the photograph, that's something too, I think, the date on this is 2017, but it really could be, and I don't see any like visual clues to date it. I haven't looked at it that carefully, but it's funny how something can have like the spirit of something taken a long time ago. And I think this photograph accomplishes that. So this photograph by Vincent Cervantes, I believe it's it's pronounced. This won first place, Best of Show. And what's odd about that is this just is not like anything that is in my normal visual playbook as far as what I'm normally attracted to. But I just think, like I mentioned earlier, I like to respond to a photograph emotionally before I try to intellectualize it too much. And there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of suggestive subject matter. And I had one person when we were hanging the show say that it was creepy, but I don't think it's creepy at all. I just think it's a beautiful photograph. And there's a lot of tension in the photograph, but the hand gesture and the placement of the boots above the subject matter. I just love the whole photograph, and I love the colors. I love the background as far as the fabric, whether it's intentional, whether it was there or she put it there, but it has a very postmodern ring to it. And as far as how I relate to it, when I first saw it, it reminded me of a Paul Outerbridge photograph. And that's a photographer you should look up because this has a similar feel to it. Anybody?
It has it looks like a painting.
It does have
More
a
so
feel.
than a photograph. It's just got a quality of a painting.
I like that it makes me ask questions. Makes me
Yeah.
wonder who is wearing the boots, who's the one shining boots, so
Yeah.
it definitely gives me that feeling. The light is so warm, and it's like sort of coming in through a window, so what time is this happening? The boots seem vintage, so there's definitely that feeling of a lot of questions regarding the story.
And the repeated pattern of the wallpaper
Yeah.
adds a really nice quality to it.
Which I think, because of my age, and maybe everyone else will share this, evokes that feeling. I remember that kind of wallpaper in homes of my aunt or grandmother's home, so that definitely gives me that feeling of
Yeah.
memory as well.
Or a photo salon from the 1800s. It almost has that ring to it as well. It's very postmodern, but at the same time, I think there's a antiquated quality to it that really stands out.
Yeah, I thought it was, and I think of all the pieces in the gallery, this is the one that prompts the most. People stand the longest in front of this
Yeah.
and argue about
Yeah.
what's happening in it. It's really interesting to
The space is so
see the
shifted.
response
Yeah.
that people have to this, because they have a strong response one way or the other. And it seems like there's a real mystery about the narrative of what the hell's going on in
Yeah.
this, and that's what people.
Well, that's the suggestive part I was talking about. There's something underlying about it. On to the next photographs. We couldn't fit everything on one wall. I really wanted to put all the protest photography on one wall, but this grouping is equally as powerful. What I love about these is it really, really shows the frustration and anger of people and reacting to the, policing pandemic we have in this country. And this one in particular, this one I actually find very humorous. You have a policeman that's about to hit a protester, and then the title of the photograph is D. Hornshaw, badge number 1154. So this is by Anna Van Schop, I believe it's pronounced. So it's not only a great photograph, but it's holding them responsible for their actions. And I respond to all these because I grew up in the 60s and I saw, the Vietnam War on TV and all the protests, and that kind of that time period. Just I really feel like we're in a situation now where it's coming alive again, and people are speaking out. They're not just looking at their cell phones all day long. So all three of these photographs are beautiful. I wish some of these were bigger, because like this particular one here by Stephanie Hume, it's called Can't Breathe. This obviously is way bigger than the other photographs of the Black Lives Matter movement. And what I love about this photograph is even the horse looks like really angry, and like the horse looks like he doesn't want to be here, but there's just all this movement and motion towards the policeman on the horse. Not so much, I don't know if it makes a statement about the Black Lives Matter movement, but it just further talks to the whole idea of policing and how we police and, you know, unchecked power in this country. So I love this photograph. I think it's a beautiful photograph. And down here, you know, there's little things you can read as you go in. You know, signs that are on the ground. Flando Castillo, and there's all these names that you see of people that were killed in America by the police. So it's just it's a strong photograph.
Even the shadows look angry.
Yeah, and all the shadows are, again, they're all kind of coming into the center of the photographs. Yeah.
What caught my eye is, yeah, all the excitement and chaos that seems to be surrounding the policeman on the horse. But then you got this guy who's just sauntering along. He's like totally casual with the whole thing. So there's two interpretations of it.
And the other thing too about all of these photographs is they're dated by the mass as far as the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think they both kind of fed off each other. I'm not sure all the uprising would have been as effective if this had happened during normal times when we're all at work and we're all busy with our lives, our prior lives. So this new normal, I think it's really enabled people to come out into the streets and protest, which is something that's been lacking for a long, long time. This one is by Robert Barris. It's called Ring 42. And before I got here today, I was thinking about this photograph because I've spent 35 years in the automotive car photography and movie industry. So when I look at this photo, I see, you know, a crew of 30 to 40 people coming on location with, you know, water trucks and you know, craft services and stylists and makeup artists, yet somebody can go out and photograph a car in such a beautiful manner by themselves with a cheap tripod or whatever. I'm just saying, like, it's amazing to me, because that was one of the things I think before I switched from photography to the film industry, is I just got so tired of dating photographs to death, where we would spend, you know, days on one image. And there's a simplicity about this photograph that I just love, and it gets the point across. And the title, you know, Dream 42, it does look like a dream. So everything was accomplished, but without all the hoopla of a, you know, film crew. So that's a personal observation, but that's one of the things that attracts me to this image.
Bob has a pretty large series, his Dream series, and they're all so surreal and dreamlike quality to them.
And he's kind of a master of Photoshop too.
Yeah.
I mean, he really is. I don't know anybody that is as
I
good as he
I
is.
believe that's a
Yeah.
composite. And he's very good at what he does.
So that brings up another point. I don't know if you caught that on camera, but Trina brought up that this particular photographer is very good at Photoshop. And I remember in 2003, I think it was, I saw an exhibit at the Detroit Public Library, and it was the first time I'd seen digital photographs at an exhibition. And they weren't perfect, but everyone was criticizing the Photoshop aspect of it.
Yeah.
And now it's such an integral part of our cell phones, our devices, everything, where manipulation now isn't looked down upon like this awful threat to film photography. And to me, it's like having another brush, you know, it's just another brush stroke, and you can say what you want, not only through the photograph, but through post photography. you know, how you
And
manipulate.
Bob's at a whole different level
Yeah.
than anybody.
If you do it well, then it translates. you
Yeah,
know?
it shouldn't dominate the picture, I agree. But, you know, and there's a lot of argument about what, you know, what you're looking at, is it the truth? But honestly, you know, having a son that's a millennial son, I don't think they look at things the same way we do, so I don't really feel like everything is concentrated on the truthfulness of the photograph so much as, you know, what message it gets across and you know, what it says to the viewer. So I'm all for it. Different photographers, one Kelsey Gaskell, and then this other one by Gary Molnar, I believe it's pronounced. I happen to know this man right here. His name's Rich, and he died of Alzheimer's. And ironically, it's funny, I jured this show, and his image popped up in the entries. Rich passed away a few years ago, and my mom currently has Alzheimer's, and I can really just identify with the blank look on his face, and just, you know, I knew him when he was a lively person and funny and just an all-around great guy. But when you suffer from Alzheimer's, your personality kind of goes on vacation and you become this different person. You become a shell of your former self. And as it relates to this photograph, this is the Packard plant in the cemetery that's right next to it. And I've spent a lot of time in this building. And I've also seen a lot of photographs of this nearly identical subject matter with the cemetery and this in the back. But this one, just the lighting and the shadows and the degree to which the building is disintegrated, it just really speaks to me. And it also speaks to this other photograph. You know, they're both, you know, iconic photographs, but they're of something or someone in their former self. They've evolved into something differently. And then, of course, you know, the tombstones, you know, it just kind of speaks to the ephemeral nature of things, and things come and they go and they're replaced by other things, and people just move on. Time marches on. So this photograph responds to my own personal sensibilities as a photographer. I love A-frame houses, and when I was in art school, Bill Rawhauser, my mentor, he used to photograph all over Hamtramck, and a lot of these just simple Hamtramck structures. And what I like about this photograph is there's this monochromatic look surrounding the house, but then you have these little splashes of color, and it kind of gives it a human quality to it. It's just, like Laurie's flowers, it's very iconic. It just kind of jumps off the page. I just love the colors. And I mean, so much of photography is luck too, and I'm not saying that like taking away from the photograph, but to have these contrasting colors, I mean, you couldn't ask for a better palette. And these houses are all disappearing, you know, slowly, one by one. So I think this is a real good document of the city of Hamtramck and the type of architecture you see when you're in Hamtramck.
Well, and the absence of people does make it a portrait of the house.
Absolutely. Yeah. Judy, you want to come in here and tell a little about it? Do you have anything to say about it?
So I've spent a lot of time driving around Detroit, and I do a lot of work like this, and I feel, for me, these are, I think, representations of resilience and hope in the city. I just find that even though something has its imperfections and it's been weathered and aged, but I try to really emulate something that is hopeful. So for me, this house just spoke to me like that, because if you look at the other two homes they received and they have grass on the front lawn, this one just sort of stands out there like, here I am. And it's just beautiful to me to see the colors, the colorful stairs and the window dressings. And then also I love, like, anytime I see little curtains, it just really evokes a story to me, something maybe from my childhood. Anytime I see these types of curtains, and they just really bring to me a personal story. So I oftentimes call these types of photographs like self-portraits, because as this home is changing and evolving, it still has some pride and standing hopeful. And so I like to think maybe I could be like that as well sometimes. So these are considered to be something that I'm really proud of being able to represent Detroit in that way.
Judy, one of the things that I love about this is, I think for anyone who's from this area would know immediately that's Hamtramck. And the other thing that I love about it is that it's so like how a child would draw a house, you know? It just is, it's so simple.
It's
and
just
colorful.
simple, right? Yeah. What you drew as a kid of a house.
That it seems really iconic,
Yes.
you know?
And Judy, I love that paper. You got me thinking about how I will be making prints in the future.
So this is also mounted on die-bond, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Because it will never change. It's beautiful, so flat.
And the other thing I see in this too that is so common in Hamtramck are all these rebuilds, these rebuilt facades. You can tell that door wasn't originally there. It's
Yeah.
probably in the center, but somebody blew a wall out or whatever. So there's a lot of suggestion of it being something other than what you see now.
Or
Like
even a duplex,
yes,
you know?
yeah, for sure,
like,
for sure.
Yeah.
So, and then the curtain not being symmetrical where the rest of the photograph
Yeah, everything.
super
Yeah.
symmetrical. So I like these little just interruptions in the photograph that kind of steal the light, the thunder from the symmetry of it.
Yes.
It's nice.
And also, I love the little light. It's such a subtle thing, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I try to do that with a lot, if I see things with lights, I love that. I
Uh-huh.
feel, again, that symbol of being hopeful, like the story, like
Okay.
somebody turned it on, who turned on the light?
Right,
Who
right.
lives there, what are they doing? So that's what I really try to evoke.
All right, so moving on, this next photograph is grouping actually. They're all landscape photographs. There's 4 of them in a row here. This one by Jerry Bassamy, I believe it's pronounced. It's called Pylons. It was shot at Lake Huron. And what I like about this photograph, which is similar to Ralph Jones's photograph of the ice sculpture, is it's a really long exposure and it kind of blurs the line between the foreground and the background. You're not sure if you're looking at land or water or where the land starts and where the water ends. And it's just got this beautiful dreamlike quality. And the thing I want to say about landscape photography is there's so many examples of good landscape photography, so it's kind of become passé in current times, but I think for you to have something that really stands out, it's got to say something, and it has to separate itself from the pack, so to speak, and I think all 4 of these do that beautifully. This one by Chris Bennett, The Birth and Death of the Day. What I like about this photograph is it just shows you how light is reflected in the landscape, and that at different times of the day, there's different meanings to be derived from a photograph depending on the light that it's reflected. And it also has this kind of archival process look to it. I'm not sure what his process was. It says archival pigment print, but this gets back to what I was saying about Photoshop. If you can get that same quality out of a photograph, if you can make your photograph look like a wet floating plate or whatever you want to achieve, and you can do it through Photoshop, then that's a great tool to have in your bag. And this is more traditional as far as landscape photography, Margaret Squires. But I love this photograph, and I love the design of it and how the tree is not, perfectly centered. And there's a kind of a musical flow to it where it goes down and then back up. And over here we have another photograph by Ralph Jones, how do you pronounce this? Point Mooley. And again, this looks to me like it's a long exposure. And I just love this print. It's such a beautiful print. And I didn't know until recently that Ralph did this kind of work, so I just love that he's exploring other avenues and other genres of photography that reside outside of his comfort zone. Well done, Ralph.
Thank you.
do you have anything you'd like to say about this particular piece, Ralph?
It was done pretty much the same time of the year, and whenever I went out to shoot, it's like, let me celebrate the dreariness of Michigan, you know? And that's a spot that I go to all the time. It's where the Detroit River and the Huron River meet and flow into Lake Erie. It gives me a great deal of mental therapy being there. So it's just one of the things that I probably photographed that particular place more than any other.
You know, you speak about being therapy. I think that's one of the things about the pandemic that's been a really big surprise for me, is that I've had to find other ways of, you know, getting to a peaceful place. And I've always loved nature, but since the pandemic, I've just like immersed myself into nature. And, you know, just whether you're looking at a photograph or actually being there, there's this kind of healing feeling about being amongst nature or photographing it, or being, you know, being there even before you photograph it, that hour you spend, you know, waiting for the sun to rise, whatever. But
I'm pretty sure that was photographed during the early days of the pandemic.
yeah. Okay, ready?
Yep.
Start over. Here we go. So the next one is by Elizabeth Thomas. It's called Virginia Bluebells, and it's a wet cyanotype. And cyanotype basically is a contact sheet where you place an object on a surface and you flash light on it, and what you see is what you get. And what I like about this photograph is that besides the actual flowers that she put on the template or on a flat surface, which would be very flat on its own, she's created depth by adding all these marks or water droplets, or, you know, they're just kind of like, they're errors that work beautifully with the photograph, and it just creates a different photograph because of the process. And a lot of this kind of photography is all about process and how you handle the materials, any kind of old printing processes, wet collodions and cyanotypes and all that kind of thing. So, nice photograph. This grouping, the two on the end are by the same photographer, Rebecca Zeiss. And in this one, she's holding what looks to be this constructed A-frame house, much like Judy Botmarino's photograph. And then there's this kind of circle of confusion, but the focus is on the house. And then you come over here, she's holding a bird's nest that's out of context because it's in her hands and not in its natural setting. But these two both kind of speak to me about place and just comfort, you know, the comfort you get out of place. And they have this, even though they're, and same with this one here by Daryl Neef, I believe is how it's pronounced. But this almost has a Joel Peter Witkin feel to it. Not so much in the subject matter, but the process. They're all a little bit, you know, on the ethereal side. This one an honorable mention. I just love that photograph. I love how you have this very thick structure, and then you have this almost like moving circle. And I like how it relates to the bird's nest as far as creating your place versus taking something out of context that relates to place. All right, the next photograph is by Denise Rohde, I believe. It's called Signs of Age, and this has a very postmodern feel to it. It reminds me of Matt Mahernon almost, where you're not sure like where her face begins and where this texture that's been placed on top of everything. I'm going to assume there's several images in one, but I just feel like when I look at this photograph, in fact, if you look real close, there's you kind of peeking into her brain or her soul, but you can see a reflection, the same reflections of the trees, you know, inside her brain or inside her head. So if you ever get a chance, look up Matt Mahernon, especially his Tom Waits album cover he did. This reminds me very much of that same kind of photograph. Very surreal, a little creepy, a little dash of creepy, but I love it. I love the color template and I love the subject matter. And this next one is by Lee Miller, and it's called Orchestra Hall. The model's name is Amina. What attracts me to this photograph is, to me, it reminds me of a 1940s film still. When I was in art school, my wife and I used to, once a month, we used to go out and we used to buy like every fashion magazine we could find. And then we would flip through the pages just looking for great fashion photography. Even though I was doing street photography, I just love this genre, and I think it's just beautifully done. I think the model just looks really like she belongs, and the fact that it's in a theater is very suggestive of cinema and old cinema stills and, you know, portraits of movie stars back in the 40s and 50s.
I love how the curve of her shoulders and her arms, it mimics the back of the seats in that space too.
Same color.
Yeah.
That's a stunning photograph. The color is just so rich.
Yeah,
I love it.
just like this one and just like the best of show, there's certain photographs in the show I would never normally respond to, and I think that's one of the cool things about being a juror is you get all this photography kind of thrown in your lap at once, and it kind of gets you out of your narrow little world of, you know, what you're normally attracted to. This particular photograph, this is Casey Hyde, untitled, but I just thought this photograph, it's very ominous, and I don't have a lot to say about it, I just respond to it. It's obviously water drops, I don't know if they're on a window or what they're on, but there's only this one small point of focus, and then everything else is left to the imagination. I think it's a beautiful photograph. And over here we have Michael Ramey. It's called Easter Portrait. We talked earlier about size. I wish this was blown up really big. This so reminds me of Deanne Arbus's photograph of the flower girl at a wedding. And the irony of that is that these two boys in the photograph, if you get close up here, they look like they're twins. And Deanne Arbus's, one of her most famous portraits was of this set of twins. New Rochelle twins, I think it was called. So this really has the quality of Deanne Arbus photograph, in my opinion. Photograph, this one by Mario, and I'm not sure of his last name, Acostagu, called Santa Clouds. It almost looks like an infrared print, but again, you have to, when you're photographing landscapes, you have to bring something new to the party, or something that just draws you in, and that's what I like about this photograph. Everything leads you into the center of the photograph where there's nothing. But it makes your eye move. It all draws you in. The footprints, the clouds, they're all just suggesting this movement towards the middle of the photograph. And sometimes when you look at a photograph, it's just static. You don't really, I don't know, you just move on to the next. And I think in the digital age too, we've gotten into this habit of just swiping through photographs. And we don't really spend the time to look at photography like we used to. So that's what I like about this photograph. I think it's well executed, well done. So this photograph by Jessica DeMuro, it's called Regenerate. Again, speaking to photographs of flowers that we've seen throughout the exhibit, there has to be something that sets it apart. And I just, this photograph is about process too. There's a lot hidden things here. There's a face down here with the mouth wide open. And this is one of those photographs like you have to kind of digest for a while to see what's going on. But there's like this tape going. You can't really see this on film, on your film, but there's this tape, these paint, almost like cells, like cartoon cells going across the photograph. And they're layering in a manner that just, it adds depth to the photograph. And this primal scream subject matter down here is fantastic. and then it just kind of fades away. He didn't go for the bait of, you know, it being this perfect square, and I love that about it. Or she didn't, I'm sorry. And then this next photograph, Among the Aspen by John Dykehouse, very traditional, but just a beautiful photograph that draws you in. It reminds me a little bit of Ansel Adams' shot of aspen trees, but well executed. You know, I like how the weighted trees are up front and then they kind of fade into the distance. Everything's sharp, so it makes you look at the whole photograph. All right, so lastly, we have a photograph by James Ritchie called Wishbones. And when I was driving here today, I was actually thinking about this photograph and how commonplace it is to see things of the industrial age in our city. And we kind of take them for granted. We walk by them every day. But, you know, when you look, if you didn't know, you know, anything about the automotive plants or industry in general, if you lived in an area where this wasn't commonplace, I mean, it looks like just this heaping mess of garbage almost. But again, growing up in Detroit, I just find a beauty to the whole industrial age. And, you know, there's this whole backstory about how all these factories were designed, and Albert Kahn, and, you know, working for Henry Ford. And I just think this is kind of at the top of the class as far as this genre of photographs. I've seen a lot of them over the years, but I love the light here, and I love the composition. I love the idea of the wishbones that break up, the straight up and down patterns. It's really well done. And that's about it. That completes it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You were a wonderful juror, and I really appreciate all the artists who contributed their work to this show. If you'd like to see stills of all the